a mystical land torn by war. Creatures great and small, armed with fantastical powers and weapons, pitted against each other for control of the realm. All commanded by tactical geniuses ready to obliterate their enemies and become true mythological masters. And standing against the armies of magic and mystery, ready to earn a place as a true myth champion, is you. Welcome to the Myth Trading Card Game, a game where you, the Myth Commander, face off against another commander one-on-one, deploying mythical creatures, casting wondrous spells, and equipping powerful weapons to lay siege against your opponent for mythological supremacy. If you are ready to be a myth master, then follow these instructions and be ready to sharpen your tactical skills and wits to face off against other commanders in intense battles for glory. To play the Myth Trading Card Game, the two most important things you will need are a deck of myth cards and a game mat. Your deck, a minimum of 50 cards, will be filled with powerful creatures and magical spells to combat foes, and the game mat displays the battlefield on which the war will be fought, as well as players' fortresses that will be attacked and defended. Various other items, such as a coin to flip or dice to roll to see who goes first, or to determine card effects, counters, such as beads or paper scraps to keep track of points or damage, and a calculator to help determine point values may also be needed. Keep a rulebook handy while you learn to play, until you can play on your own. Myth commanders battle each other for one goal: to breach the enemy fortress. Both players deploy creatures to attack the other fortress, a colossal defensive structure with 3 towers. Each tower stands with 200 wall points. For a shorter game, players are free to use only 1 or 2 towers to play. The first player to use their creatures to whittle all of their opponent's towers down to 0 wall points will breach the fortress and win the game. Seems simple enough at first, but in the world of myth, nothing is as it seems. In the Myth Trading Card Game, there are 4 main card types, all of which must work in harmony to carry you to victory. Creature cards are your main fighting unit, and must be deployed to the battlefield to attack your opponent's towers and protect your own. Sorcery cards cast powerful spells that change the flow of the game, granting advantages and disadvantages to both players. Armory cards are used to augment the strength of your creatures, or inhibit or even destroy your opponent's creatures. And field cards change the field conditions and grant advantages and disadvantages to creatures depending on their various stats. Generally, a 50-card deck serves well, but the ratio of cards largely depends on what type of deck you want to build. Do you prefer to employ hulking brutes to overpower your foes? Do you want to cast manipulative spells to confound your opponents? Do you want to influence the outcome of battle by giving your creatures powerful gear? Do you want to obstruct your enemies with unpredictable weather patterns your forces can easily adapt to? The possibilities are limitless. The next most important part of a myth game is the game mat. The game mat does 2 important things. It shows where your cards are meant to be placed, and it displays your fortress and the 3 precious towers you must protect. The fortress is located here, in the middle of the mat. Every card has its own place on the mat, but no cards may be placed upon the fortress during gameplay. The place that sees the most action is the battlefield, located here, just in front of your fortress. This is where you will deploy your creatures and place your armory cards, either setting them face down for an ambush or equipping them directly to a creature to amplify their power. Notice how there are 3 columns of spaces in the battlefield, and they all line up just right with the 3 towers? This relates to how creatures on the battlefield are able to attack the opposing towers. The front 3 spaces are called the front line, and the spaces behind them are called the rank line. Creatures cannot be moved to a different row or column after being deployed, except by certain card effects. And creatures either excel or fail depending largely on where they are placed. This means that placement of your creatures must depend entirely on their strengths and weaknesses, and is a key detail to remember for battle. In order to cast your sorcery cards, you need a place to conjure them. That place is the sorcery chamber, located here in the top right corner of your mat. There are 4 spaces to place sorcery cards, and unless they are of high level, sorcery cards are generally disposed of after use. We'll discuss sorcery levels later. To change the field upon which battles take place, change weather conditions, or put natural hazards into play, you will need the field zone, located in the top left, directly opposite the sorcery chamber. There are only 3 spaces to place field cards here, but unlike the battlefield or the sorcery chamber, only one of each category of field card can be placed here, between both players. This means that while a terrain field card is active in your opponent's field zone, you are not allowed to play any terrain field cards. But if your opponent has no active weather field cards, then you are allowed to play one, but only one. We'll discuss field card categories later, but it's important to note that your opponent may or may not heavily rely on field cards, so it's important to adjust your strategies to make sure you aren't prevented from playing your own field cards just because your opponent's field zone spaces are full. Your creatures will be unavoidably engaged in fierce battles with enemy forces, so unfortunately, this means that many of your creatures may be killed. Creatures that are killed are placed in the afterlife, located on the bottom left corner of the mat. There are 2 spaces in the afterlife section: the cemetery, where creatures typically go, and a special place called the necromancer's altar. You have the option to send a killed creature to this altar instead of the cemetery, but only one creature may inhabit the altar at one time. What can you do with a creature in this altar? All will be revealed in time. During each turn, you must draw 1 card from your deck, and used up sorcery, armory, and field cards are placed in the discard pile. Both will be located here in the bottom right, opposite your afterlife section. Nothing more to it. And finally, deploying your creatures and using various effects may require a special cost. These costs are paid in the form of skill points. When you start the game, you begin with 2 skill points to use as you wish. And when you draw a card for each of your turns, you also gain 2 additional skill points. Your skill points are kept on a skill point counter located on the lowest edge of your mat, behind your fortress. Each player can have a maximum of 10 skill points, but there's no need to worry about never getting to use them. The important part is knowing when to use them, saving them for when you need them, and spending them wisely. Now that you know the field, it's time you get acquainted with your deck. Your myth deck will consist of 4 different main categories of cards: creatures, sorcery, armory, and field. Creature cards are your main attack units. Without them, there can be no battle. Creatures are recognized easily by their rich orange coloring. Creatures are placed by deploying them from your hand to the battlefield. Creatures are further categorized by affiliation, species, class, and rank, and each carries with it a set of attack points, guard points, and health points. But more on points later. Affiliation is the most basic category by which creatures are separated. There are 8 affiliations, and each creature is affected differently by card effects depending on its affiliation. They are Earth, Air, Water, Fire, Metal, Forest, Light, and Darkness. In addition to being able to attack each other and cause battle damage, each creature can also inflict extra damage to a creature it attacks, based on its affiliation, which is called element damage. You will learn more about damage later. Species divides creatures further and grants further benefits or detriments. There are 20 species in all: human, beast, bird, reptile, amphibian, marine, arthropod, halfling, hybrid, draconid, machine, mutant, magic, nature, weather, energy, space, time, holy, and unholy. Sorcery, armory, and field effects will affect different species in different ways, so choosing from them is a matter of what fits your style best. Are you a beast tamer? Do you walk with dragons? Do you lean more towards science than magic? Do you dare to manipulate space and time? Do you walk in the light? Or do you deal with the devil? The choice is yours alone. Classes divide creatures further still. There are well over 100 different classes, and they affect creatures in even more ways. Unlike affiliations and species, a creature can sport more than one class. Some sport as many as 3. So even 2 myth commanders who wield the power of Earth in their decks, and both even using halflings, will still have vastly different armies at their disposal. Seek out the classes that fit your style best, and use them in conjunction with affiliation and species to achieve maximum synergy with your deck. Finally, creatures are divided by rank, which determines how powerful a creature is, and thus how easily it can be called upon. This category is the most important, since powerful creatures cannot be easily deployed. Just as in chess, before sending your powerful soldiers out, you must first send the pawns. A creature first requires a number of skill points as payment to be deployed, and the number of skill points required as payment depends on the creature's rank. Rank 2 or 3 creatures require only 1 skill point. Rank 4 or 5 creatures require 3. Those of rank 6 and 7 require 5 skill points. Rank 8 and 9 creatures require 6. And the mighty rank 10 creatures require 7 skill points. Creatures of rank 1 require no cost whatsoever to deploy, so it's important to keep plenty of those handy in order to save your skill points for stronger creatures later. Now that you know about creatures, you must know that creatures alone will not win you the battle. Sorcery cards are the next category of card at your disposal. Sorcery cards are colored a vivid blue and are cast in your sorcery chamber. Sorcery cards are classified by category and level. The 5 categories of sorcery cards dictate how they affect the game. Spell sorcery cards have general effects on players and the game itself. Bewitchment sorcery cards tend to affect creatures directly. Charm sorcery cards tend to affect armory cards. Curse sorcery cards tend to affect field cards. And enchantment sorcery cards tend to affect other sorcery cards. Sorcery cards are usually sent straight to the discard pile after use, but many can linger on the field after casting. How long a sorcery card remains in play depends on its level. Versed level sorcery cards are sent to the discard pile immediately after they are cast. Intermediate sorcery cards remain in play for a finite number of turns after use. And the highest level, Maester level, will stay on the field indefinitely. Usually these require a cost to maintain their effects. Sorcery cards are key in changing the situation to your advantage. Learn how these cards work in order to use their effects in conjunction with your creatures and maximize their synergy to their fullest for victory. Now that you can use sorcery cards to turn the tide of the game on a large scale, it's time you learned how the game can be influenced on a smaller scale, through your creatures. Specifically, the type of card that you can use directly in conjunction with your creatures. Armory cards. Armory cards are colored gray, and are placed in the battlefield, directly beneath the specific creature you wish to use that armory card. There are 4 different categories of armory cards, each representing the different ways the armory card is used. Only 1 armory card can be attached to a creature at one time, and when a creature is killed or otherwise removed from play, the attached armory card is sent to the discard pile. Weapon armory cards tend to increase the offensive capabilities of a creature, such as raising AP or activating special effects during battle. Armor armory cards tend to benefit a creature's defensive capabilities, such as raising GP or HP, or protecting a creature in battle. Vehicle armory cards act as a balance between offense and defense, and can even sometimes be treated as creatures themselves. And finally, trap armory cards act as inhibitors to your opponent in many ways. Unlike weapon or armor armory cards, vehicle and trap armory cards do not necessarily require a creature to be placed on the battlefield. Vehicle armory cards can often be deployed in the same way creatures can, while trap armory cards can either be attached to a creature or placed face down in its own space in your battlefield. This is called setting the trap, and when the circumstances are right, you can flip the card face up and use its effect right away. This is called springing the trap. Trap armory cards each have an effect when attached to a creature, and an effect that only works after being set and sprung, making them very versatile. When a trap armory card has been sprung, its effect generally lasts for that turn, and is thus sent to the discard pile. Armory cards can increase the strength of your forces, but because most of them can only be used with creatures, it's a good idea to keep the number of armory cards in your deck low to accommodate the creatures. Creatures will be more important than armory cards after all, and this could mean the difference between victory and defeat at a crucial moment. Now you know how to deploy creatures, cast sorcery, and attach armory cards. But did you know you can even change the air around you, the skies above, or even the very ground upon which your forces clash? This is done by way of the fourth and final major category of myth card, the field card. Field cards are colored green and are placed in your field zone. Unlike sorcery cards, field cards remain on the field indefinitely, and unlike armory cards, they do not require creatures to be played. However, only one of each type of field card can be active at one time between both players. The three types of field cards are terrain, weather, and hazard. And as long as one player controls a field card of one of those types, the opposing player cannot play a field card of that type until the opponent's card is no longer in play. Terrain field cards tend to grant benefits to certain creatures depending on their affiliation, species, or class. Weather field cards can also grant benefits to some creatures, but they can also be harmful to others. Weather cards are the only field cards that leave the field after being played, usually lasting only 3 turns. Hazard field cards cause harmful effects on creatures, and can even harm your opponent directly in various ways. Because of the restrictions on how many field cards can be active at once, it's important to not rely on them too much, as you may have an opponent that uses many field cards, and therefore doesn't allow you to play yours. Now you know about the 4 main card types in the game of Myth. Now you are ready to learn about the structure of a turn, what cards you can play, when to play them, and when and how to attack. Once both players have agreed on who will go first, the battle begins. Both players shuffle their decks and start with a hand of 6 cards with a maximum hand size limit of 8, and 2 skill points with a maximum of 10. A turn consists of the following sequence of stages: the draw stage, the strategy stage, the briefing stage, the battle stage, the debriefing stage, and the end stage. When a turn ends, the next turn repeats this cycle of stages until the end of the turn, and the next turn starts the cycle all over again. During the draw stage, the turn player draws 1 card from their deck and gains 2 skill points. If it is the very first turn of the game, the turn player gains no skill points. During the strategy stage, the turn player may play a maximum of 1 field card, provided a field card of that type is not already active, and they may cast any number of sorcery cards they wish, provided they have free spaces in their sorcery chamber, and can fulfill the conditions or pay the costs of those sorcery cards. During the briefing stage, you will prepare for combat. During this stage, the turn player may deploy as many creatures as they can. You may attach or set a maximum of 2 armory cards, and you may unclick or turn right side up all of your clicked creatures. Remember to pay the appropriate skill point cost for creatures of higher ranks. and remember that a creature can only have one attached armory card at a time. And now, it's time to march into battle. During the battle stage, you may attack with all your unclicked creatures. After your creatures attack, calculate damage, and if there are any creatures on the battlefield that have 0 hit points remaining, they are considered killed and are immediately sent to the cemetery. Unless you choose to send a killed creature to the Necromancer's altar to be revived later. All armory cards attached to killed creatures also go to the discard pile. Remember, a clicked creature cannot attack, so be sure to unclick them as soon as you can. Now it's time to debrief your forces. In the debriefing stage, all your creatures that attacked during your battle stage are turned sideways, or clicked, and must remain so until your next briefing stage. You also have the option to move a creature in your Necromancer's altar to your hand. The cost to do so is the same as the cost to deploy that creature. So for example, if your rank 3 creature was killed during your opponent's battle stage, and you chose to send it to the altar, during your next debriefing stage, you can pay 1 skill point to add it from the altar to your hand. This helps you retrieve a card that is instrumental to your strategy, or retain access to an easily deployable card in case your hand options are limited. And finally, the end stage. Once the final stage of the turn begins, all sorcery, armory, and weather field cards that have fulfilled their effects and must be sent to the discard pile at the end of the turn are sent there immediately. Also, because the hand size limit for a myth game is 8 cards, if you have 9 or more cards in your hand, you must send cards to your cemetery if they are creatures, or to your discard pile if they are non-creatures, until you have an 8-card hand. Once your end stage is over, the cycle begins anew with your opponent's draw stage. Remember when and how each of your cards should be played, and each stage of your turn in which they can be played, and your strategies will slowly come together, and victory is that much closer. Now that you know about creatures and when to play them, it's important to know how to play them. Creatures are your main attack force, so knowing how to attack with them is vital to the game. During your battle stage, your unclicked creatures can attack, and you'll be able to attack your opponent's creatures or towers. While attacking is important, there are 5 major rules that must be followed. 1. If it is your very first turn of the game, you are not allowed to attack with a creature. 2. A clicked creature, one that has been turned sideways after attacking or by a card effect, cannot attack. 3. Creatures deployed to the front line can attack any of your opponent's creatures, but creatures deployed to the rank line can only attack creatures in your opponent's front line. 4. Only creatures in the front line may attack your opponent's towers. They can only attack the tower in the same column in the battlefield, and that tower can only be attacked by that creature if there are no opposing creatures in that column. And 5. A creature cannot attack a tower the same turn it was deployed, even if its column is empty. When creatures do battle, their attack points, or AP, and guard points, or GP, are compared and calculated, and damage is dealt to the creature's health points, or HP. Depending on which point values end up being higher, the losing creature will take damage. When the attacking creature's attack points are higher than the targeted creature's guard points, the difference is dealt as damage to the targeted creature's health points. If the attacker's attack points are lower than the target's guard points, however, then the attacker takes damage equal to the difference. And if the attacker's attack points and the target's guard points are equal, the attack is a push, and neither side takes damage. That's not all you need to know about damage, though. Creatures are divided by affiliation, and when a creature of a certain affiliation attacks a creature of a disadvantageous affiliation, the target takes an extra 10 points of damage. This is called element damage. With the exception of light and darkness, each affiliation has one advantage and one disadvantage over the others. Earth creatures deal element damage to air creatures. Air creatures damage water creatures. Water damages fire. Fire damages metal. Metal damages forest. And forest comes full circle to damage earth. Here's how element damage works. If an attacking earth creature's attack points are greater than the guard points of an air creature target, the target takes damage to their health points equal to the difference plus an additional 10 health points of damage. If an attacking fire creature attacks a water creature with higher guard points than its attack points, the attacker will take damage equal to the difference as well as an extra 10 damage. However, if the attacker's attack points and the target's guard points are even, but the attacker is metal while the target is forest, the target will still take 10 points of element damage. Likewise, if the attacker's attack points and the target's guard points are equal, but the attacker is metal while the target is fire, then the attacker will take 10 element damage. And finally, you need to know how and when to attack your opponent's towers. Attacking the towers is the best way to bring their wall points to 0. Remember, only creatures in your front line can attack your foe's towers, and not if they were deployed the same turn or share their column with opposing creatures. Calculating damage for a tower is simple. When you attack a tower with your creature, subtract your attacker's attack points from the tower's wall points. There are certain creature, sorcery, and armory cards that can inflict damage to your opponent's towers directly, but it's important not to rely on them. Attacking creatures deal the most damage consistently. It may take some time, considering your creatures will normally only be able to focus on one tower at a time. Their paths will be regularly blocked, and they will suffer damage in combat. But when you finally reduce all 3 of your opponent's towers to 0 wall points, their fortress has been breached, and you win the game. Congratulations! You have now learned the basics of the Myth trading card game. But there's still much more to learn, and you're only just getting started. The world of Myth is immense and sprawling, and there are secrets around every corner. Gather cards to build your deck, learn every rule, practice every strategy, and keep your eyes peeled for more Myth magic coming your way. Soon, you will have the honor of becoming a true Myth Master.